I cared for my sister growing up when both our parents were useless and sacrificed my early adulthood to make sure she was okay, but when I was on the brink of homelessness and needed a place to stay, she completely bailed on me. Now she wants my forgiveness, but I find it hard after pretty much being told to go F myself. Posted by you/Artishockers. My sister, 26F, from a young age, has had only one person to rely on, and that person was me, 29M. We come from a broken family, with one parent who was only around until I was 5 and the other who was stuck in a cycle of addiction. Because of our situation, I grew up very quickly and shielded her from as much as I could. She was obviously aware of what was going on, but she was not in the crosshairs. I started by stealing from our mother to make sure we had food and the bills were paid. I got a part-time job at 13 because we couldn't rely on our mother, and when I graduated, I immediately got 2 jobs and we moved out. I had to push my sister through high school. She wasn't an easy teen, for obvious reasons, on top of going month to month trying to get as much money together as possible to pay our bills. At 19, she finally graduated after being held back a year. She changed her tune a lot, started working as well, and had her own place when she was 21. I finally got a shot to do something for myself and got a degree. As a result, I got a much better job, but unfortunately, that was right before the pandemic hit, so I pretty much went from hired to fired, as I was a new hire. Now, the reason I'm saying all that is not to pat myself on the back but to stress why my reaction is the way it is. I was out of work, on the brink of losing my apartment, and only had one person I expected I could turn to, my sister. She was recently married, still lives, obviously, with her husband, so I asked if I could stay a few weeks, at most a few months, until I got a new job. It was a no. I was taken aback, but it remained a no. A week or 2 later, I was kicked out of my apartment. I asked again, and it was still a no. At this point, I was homeless, and the only reason I didn't end up sleeping on the damn street was because I could crash at a few friends' places. Until I got a temporary job, I rented a room with a bunch of roommates for a while, eventually got a job in my field again, and am now doing fine. That said, I have not spoken to my sister since. She has called, messaged, banged on my door, sent crying voice messages, apologized dozens of times, tried to explain herself, tried going to my job, tried going to friends, everything. I haven't said a word to her. It's been over a year now. She recently had a child, and she is still desperately trying to reach out. She claims her husband refused to let me stay. He even reached out several times to beg me to talk to her, but to me, the one time I needed her, she basically told me to F myself. I feel like it was the last push I needed to just end that chapter of my life. I feel bad, but just not bad enough, I guess? Even my friends and my girlfriend are on my case, saying I should forgive her. They understood it at first but now think I'm being a jerk. What would you guys do? Top/relevant comments. Commenter. Tell your friends and girlfriend that only you get to decide when you're ready to talk to your sister, that it's not their place nor their business to try to force you into an interaction you aren't emotionally ready for. If they care about you at all, they will shut the F up and let you do things when you are ready to do them. I'd send your sister one message telling her that you aren't closing the door on ever having a relationship with her, but you need her to back off and give you the time and space to work through your feelings of betrayal. Let her know that you will reach out to her when, and if, you are ready to, and not a minute before, and that the more she pushes, the less you want to be around her. Then get into counseling to work through your feelings, decide how much of a relationship with her you can handle emotionally, and proceed from there. If your girlfriend and friends keep pushing, then they are only doing so for their own selfish purposes rather than out of concern for you, and you need to shut them down hard. Commenter 2. This is good advice. Some skeptical part of me is wondering why the sister wants Op back in her life now that she has a baby. Babysitting, defraying baby expenses, wanting Op to play the happy, generous uncle? If it were really guilt, she would have reached out earlier. And it seems like the sister only reached out once Op was back on his feet. Commenter 3. You've done everything for her you were obligated to. The one time you needed something, she failed you. I don't care if it was her spouse who initially said you couldn't stay there, she went along with it. I'd have a really hard time forgiving, and it would be impossible for me to forget. At some point, you might be okay being superficial acquaintances, but you'll probably never be able to trust that she'd have your back ever again. Update 8 days later. So I had a huge number of people inquiring about what ended up happening and asking me to make an update should anything occur, and while I wasn't sure if I would or even should, I eventually decided to just go ahead and do it. Let me start by apologizing to the people who commented on my post. I made the post and it didn't seem to gain much traction at all, so I more or less stopped looking at it for about a day, only to discover the next day that I had received a lot of comments. Unfortunately, when I decided to reply to many of them, I realized that this subreddit locks the comments after a certain number have been made or a certain karma threshold is reached. I'm afraid I was not aware of this admittedly very odd rule, so that's on me. I did end up reading most of the comments and would like to thank everyone who offered advice or simply said something supportive. First, I want to answer a couple of questions that I wasn't able to address, along with correcting some inaccurate assumptions made in the previous post that I saw repeated quite a few times. The first few no's were given without any reasonable explanation. I wasn't aware that her given reason, that her husband was not okay with it, was the cause until later. She did not know she was pregnant when she declined, and most of this happened before she would have even been pregnant in the first place. I mean, most of this took place over a year ago. I even mentioned that in the post, so I'm not sure how that math would even work. I am not an anti-vaxxer or dirty or anything like that. There were quite a few comments theorizing that this might have been her reason for refusing. I got my 2 vaccination shots the moment I was able to, and while my personal hygiene is no one's business, I shower once a day and my apartment is spotless. A lot of the advice and comments seem to come from the perspective of people in functional families with a functional family structure. That is not the case here. The primary reason I'm so gutted about this entire situation is exactly that. This isn't a case of, well, I don't want my cousin to stay in my house, he can stay somewhere else. This is a case of me having sacrificed my entire youth and a significant portion of my early adult life for someone I had no part in creating and no parental responsibility for. The first and only time I ever asked her to do something for me, being the only person I could reasonably fall back on, and she didn't do it. That's more than a familial spat, that's a straight up betrayal. That's also my answer to the people saying she owes me nothing because I chose to be a parent. Anyway, with that out of the way, I decided to follow some advice given by several people. I told my girlfriend and the friends who involved themselves, or were involved by my sister, to back off or lose my number. They do not understand my perspective, and they likely never will. I need to accept that, as I have a tendency to talk about my life as if it's a standard, but it's only standard to me. Luckily, most people don't go through any of that. I obviously had a longer, face-to-face conversation with my girlfriend and individual close friends, but it boils down to that. One friend kept pestering me about it, and I ended up dropping him. My girlfriend was apologetic, and most of my friends were either apologetic or said they'd drop the subject. I ended up writing a long email to my sister. While I won't copy and paste the entire thing here, as it contains a lot of personal information and far more horrible stuff that I'm not even sure would be allowed on a sub like this, it more or less boiled down to me explaining to her how her refusal to take me in for what ended up being a few weeks made me feel. I also detailed a long list of things I had done to take care of her. I ended the email by telling her that even if I take her version of the story as truth, and her husband is the reason I wasn't allowed to stay, that it's entirely irrelevant to me, because that just means she didn't fight for me at all. I also informed her that I have no interest in meeting her child at this time, and I have no interest in reconnecting with her. If that ever changes, I will be the one to reach out. I told her to let this be a lesson to her, as it has been a painful lesson to me. Boiled down, I have decided to move on and keep the door open by the tiniest of cracks. She has responded a lot since then and seems unable to accept it, but I haven't responded since. I don't have anything else to tell you, I'm afraid, and since the sub only allows one update, well, it is what it is. Again, thank you all for taking the time to respond to my post, and thank you for your insightful replies. Top/relevant comments. Commenter. The fact that she's still pestering you despite you clearly telling her that you don't want that says a lot about who she is as a person, and what it says is that she's selfish and entitled and only cares about herself and what she wants. In which case, you are better off never re-establishing contact because she would only use that opening to try to get something from you. If you haven't blocked her everywhere already, do so. If she shows up in person ever again, give her one warning that if she doesn't leave, or if she comes back, you will call the police and have her officially trespassed from your property and will be pursuing a restraining order against her because she is harassing you. Ops response. I wouldn't necessarily view her as a person who just wants stuff from others, it would be an unfair characterization. For example, a lot of people were saying she probably just wants free babysitting, which I really doubt in general. That said, she is blocked pretty much everywhere apart from my personal email, which is what I refer to as the tiny opening. Unfortunately, that's what she is using to bombard me with emails, so I may end up blocking her there too. If it was unclear, however, I am certainly not thinking of re-establishing anything anytime soon, talking years here. Commenter 2. Wow. I totally get why you would feel not only betrayed but also extremely hurt. I think it is crazy that people would sum it up to your sister doesn't owe you anything. You expect your sibling to be there for you. Period. My advice is to seek therapy to help you get over the things that happened in the past. You are a traumatized person, and you need to navigate your feelings and should do it with a professional. That is, if you haven't already. Ops response. Had the situation been different, I might imagine I would have reacted differently. But since the situation is what it is, I guess I do more or less feel like she owes me to an extent. But as I said, you have to view that in the whole picture. I did not owe her so much of my life and energy either, but I still did it. That's how she should have been towards me. Commenter 3. I'm really sorry that this happened. I understand what it's like to be a giver and not be able to count on people when you need them. I would be interested if you ever sit down with your sister to find out exactly what was going through her mind. It's always interesting to me how she's thinking now versus what she was thinking then. And it could be that she's a passive person who has always been either taken care of or a victim, and all she needed was her husband's disapproval to make her feel insecure enough not to understand how important it was that she be there for you. I am most of the time advocating for forgiveness, for the benefit of the giver as well as the receiver. But I always acknowledge that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and a true apology involves taking full responsibility, showing true remorse, and a willingness to patiently mend the damage caused. I'm glad that you were able to work this out with your girlfriend. I'm sure she only had the best of intentions. My heart breaks for your sister, and for you. You survived and were injured deeply, and now she is left with the consequences of her actions and no way to fix them. If it were me, I would listen, if you have not done so already, to fully understand and have her express her understanding of how you feel and why. But your approach is your approach, and it is perfectly valid. What happened was no small thing and, in the context of your life, was a terrible betrayal. I guess I would ask her, if our situations were reversed, can you imagine me doing what you did, and how would you feel had I done so? What you are saying is that it doesn't matter because there's no reason or thought process good enough, and it is beyond redemption for the time being. Given your bond, I think eventually you will have some manner of connection with your sister, but for now, this is what you have to do, and she needs to respect that. Her efforts do show sincerity, even if they are violating the boundaries you have set. I want to be harder on her. These are the consequences. I'm happy that you survived and that you figured out how to get your life back on track, and I have sadness for both of you and respect for your need to keep her in the category in which she put herself. Ops response. That's another part of the puzzle here. I do feel like seeing her in person and talking to her is essentially relenting to her consistent attempts to contact me, which is something I really do not want to do for two reasons. First, it sets a precedent that enough consistent contacting, bothering, and stalking will force me to forgive her. Second, I simply don't feel like she deserves to be forgiven, at least not yet, and an in-person talk may mean I am swayed to forgive her, which sets another precedent. At this point, however, she shouldn't have to worry about whether I would have done the same. It is an irrelevant question now. If right now she got to my door and had nowhere else to go, I'd probably answer with a simple no.